Georgia is not the warm and friendly place I imagined. When I first moved into my new home, the autumn air felt damp and cold. The leaves that blanketed the streets weren't just brown. They were shades of gray and black, curling up like dead hands reaching out from the ground. It was just me here at first. No kids, no friends yet. The house across the street had been empty for weeks. Then one evening I noticed the light flickering in the window. A moving truck had shown up, and an older man and woman were unloading boxes. The man seemed gruff, worn, but his eyes, they were too intense. For a moment they fixed on me through my own window, and a chill ran down my spine. The next day, I saw him standing in his driveway, staring directly at my house, his mouth moving silently, as if reciting something. At night, strange noises began, a scraping sound at my back door, like something was scratching to get in. I dismissed it as a stray cat at first. But the following night, it was louder, almost frantic, as if whatever was out there was desperate. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. I looked out the window and, just barely visible in the moonlight, saw my neighbor standing outside his door, staring right at me again, his figure motionless. I closed my blinds. One night, I finally gathered the courage to confront him. I crossed the street, my footsteps echoing too loudly for comfort. When I reached his driveway, he was already standing there, as if he'd been waiting. His gaze was unwavering, piercing. I managed a shaky, "Can I help you with something?" The corner of his mouth lifted, but it wasn't a smile. "Did you hear them?" He asked in a flat voice. "Hear who?" I stammered, suddenly aware of the quiet around us. "The whispers," he said, his voice barely a murmur. "They've been trying to get in for a while now." I backed up, trying to put space between us. He didn't move, just kept staring. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the familiar scraping sound, but it was right outside my bedroom window this time. I looked out, and there he was, standing on my lawn, his hands pressed against the glass, whispering something I couldn't make out. In a panic, I called the police. They came and searched, but by then he had disappeared back into his house. The next morning, there was a note stuck to my door, written in messy, shaking letters. "They like you now." I haven't seen him since, but every night, the whispering continues.
Halloween was supposed to be fun for my kids. We'd carved pumpkins, decorated the porch, and even planned a scary movie marathon. The streets were buzzing with children dressed as monsters, superheroes, and witches, running from door to door, filling their bags with treats. My kids were excited, dragging me out of the house with their candy buckets already half full. As we walked, I noticed something unusual. One house, hidden behind tall, bare trees, seemed deserted. Its windows were dark and the lawn overgrown, but the front door was open just slightly, as if inviting someone in. "Let's skip that one," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But the kids insisted. Maybe they have the best candy. They were so eager I couldn't say no. As we approached, a musty smell filled the air, like rotting leaves and damp wood. The closer we got, the more the house seemed wrong. The paint was peeling, the windows fogged with something thick and dark. But my kids marched forward, undeterred. They rang the doorbell. Nothing. They knocked, still no response. Just as we turned to leave, we heard a creak. The door opened wider, revealing a shadowy hallway inside. A figure slowly emerged, a tall man, his face hidden under a hood. He didn't say anything, just reached out, holding a small bowl with a few pieces of candy. My kids grabbed a few, said thank you, and we walked back down the driveway. As we made our way to the next house, one of the kids said, The candy feels sticky. I looked down and saw a red smudge on their fingers. Maybe it's just melted, I said, trying to sound cheerful. But when we got home, I took the candies out of their buckets to inspect. They were wrapped in plain paper, with small symbols scrawled on them in red ink. My hands shook as I opened one, and inside was not chocolate, but something else. Something foul-smelling and sticky, with tiny dark specks that moved on their own. I threw them away, hoping that would be the end of it. But the next morning, my kids woke up with red symbols drawn on their arms, the same ones that had been on the wrappers. We scrubbed, but they wouldn't come off. That night, they started sleepwalking, drawn to the window, whispering, "He's calling us." No one else seemed to notice, and we haven't gone trick-or-treating since. Halloween night is usually quiet for me. I don't put up decorations, I don't answer the door for trick-or-treaters, and I don't host any parties. But this year, something felt off. The house felt colder than usual, and the shadows seemed longer, darker. Around 10 p.m., I heard a faint knock on the door. I ignored it, thinking it was just kids looking for treats. But then it came again, louder this time, more insistent. I looked through the peephole, but no one was there. My pulse quickened as I closed the door and locked it. Minutes later, the knock came again, but this time it was at the back door. I froze. No one ever goes to the back. Slowly, I walked to the kitchen, my heart pounding. I didn't open the door, just stood there, waiting. Suddenly, the knock came from the window right next to me. I jumped, but when I turned, all I saw was darkness. I tried to call a friend, but my phone had no signal. I checked the Wi-Fi, no connection either. Then, the lights went out. In the pitch black, I heard faint breathing, just on the other side of the door. The handle jiggled, as if someone were trying to turn it. Grabbing a flashlight, I locked myself in the bathroom, hoping it would stop. But as I sat there, I heard a soft tapping on the bathroom door. It grew louder and louder until it was a pounding that echoed through the house. I covered my ears, waiting for it to end. Hours later, I finally opened the door. Everything was silent, but on the walls, written in dark, smudged letters, was a single word: stay.
Every Halloween, my grandmother told stories. Not the fun, spooky tales you'd expect, but dark, unsettling ones filled with curses, spirits, and things better left alone. She'd make tea, pull her old quilt tight around her, and motion for me to sit close. Her eyes would grow distant, like she was watching something far away. That's when I knew she was going to share another part of our family's dark history. Last year on Halloween night, she told me something she had never shared before. Her voice dropped low, almost a whisper, as she began. "This curse has been in our family for generations." She paused, her gaze fixed on me. "You may not believe it, but our family has a shadow that comes every Halloween, looking to claim someone." I wanted to laugh, but something in her eyes held me back. Her hands trembled slightly as she continued. "It all began with my grandmother, your great-great-grandmother. She was a proud woman, maybe too proud. One Halloween, she refused to honor a vow she'd made to a powerful spirit, something she'd promised to keep safe. She broke the pact, and the spirit left a curse on the women in our family. Now every Halloween, it comes for one of us, testing if we're worthy of our safety." She glanced at the clock, noticing it was just past midnight. She leaned in, her grip tight on my arm. "This is the night it comes. Stay close, and whatever you do, don't go near the window." I could tell she was serious, but it seemed ridiculous to be afraid of a curse that was supposed to be decades old. Yet, As the night wore on, I felt an uneasy chill settle over the house. I tried to dismiss it, but every creak and groan from the walls seemed to echo louder in the stillness. My grandmother sat by the window, peeking through the curtains with a wary look in her eyes. Around 1 a.m., the house grew quiet, unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Then just outside the window, I thought I saw something, a shape, tall and dark, standing on the lawn. It was just an outline, a figure with no real face or features, but it seemed to be staring right into the house. I backed away, my heart thumping, but my grandmother motioned me to stay still, a finger to her lips. Suddenly the figure moved, gliding around the side of the house, its shadow stretching long across the grass. My grandmother hurried to draw the curtains, muttering words under her breath. Words I didn't recognize. I wanted to ask her what it was, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on us. A tapping noise started at the window, faint but relentless, like nails on glass. My grandmother's face went pale. "Don't open the curtains," she whispered. "Don't look at it. It wants you to see it. That's how it gets in." I sat frozen, barely daring to breathe. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was outside was growing impatient. Suddenly the power went out, plunging us into darkness. My grandmother reached for my hand, her grip icy cold. "Just close your eyes," she whispered, "and it will pass." I closed my eyes, but the tapping didn't stop. It moved, now coming from different parts of the house. The front door, the walls, even the ceiling, like it was circling, searching for a way in. I held my breath, trying to ignore the feeling that it was calling my name, faintly, just on the edge of hearing. Minutes, maybe hours passed before the tapping finally stopped. Slowly, I opened my eyes. The power was back on, and the silence returned. My grandmother let go of my hand, her face worn and tired. She didn't say anything, just nodded, as if she'd expected this to happen. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every Halloween since, I've felt that same chill in the air, like something unseen is waiting just outside, watching. And each year, my grandmother tells me the same warning: never look out the window. My dad was never one to believe in the supernatural, but every Halloween, he'd tell me the same warning: stay away from the woods. He wouldn't say why, just that something lurked there. Last Halloween, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to see what my dad had been so afraid of. The air was thick and cold, and the leaves crunched under my feet as I walked deeper into the woods. The trees closed in, casting strange shadows that twisted and moved, even though there was no wind. I hadn't been walking for long when I heard it, a faint whisper, almost like someone calling my name. I turned around, but no one was there. I kept walking, but the whisper grew louder, closer, until it felt like someone was standing right behind me. When I turned around, there was no one. But then I felt it, something cold touching my shoulder. I bolted, running as fast as I could back to the house. My dad was waiting for me on the porch, his face pale. He didn't say a word, just ushered me inside. That night, I woke up to find my dad sitting by my bed, watching the window. "They almost took you," he whispered. He never explained what that meant, and he never let me go near those woods again. Halloween was always a special time for my soccer team. Instead of skipping practice, we'd schedule a late-night session, just for the thrill of playing under the dim, flickering field lights surrounded by an empty, eerie silence. That year we chose the old field on the outskirts of town, a place we rarely used. It was surrounded by dense trees and had bleachers that looked like they hadn't been touched in years, covered in chipped paint and graffiti. The lights there worked, though barely, and we thought it would add to the Halloween spirit. The evening started out fun enough. The field was misty, giving everything a ghostly glow under the patchy light. We laughed, shouted, and dared each other to run into the woods, trying to shake off the spooky vibes. But as we began playing, strange things started happening. The ball would roll in odd directions, even when kicked straight, and the ground felt unusually soft under our feet, like we were running on wet earth. The first really strange thing happened about 30 minutes in. I was dribbling down the field when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing by the bleachers. It was just a silhouette, barely visible through the mist, but it looked like they were watching us. "Hey, who's that?" I asked, stopping in my tracks. The others glanced over, but by then, the figure was gone. We laughed it off, though I noticed a few teammates glancing nervously toward the bleachers every so often. A cold wind blew across the field, and suddenly all the floodlights flickered, casting strange shadows on the ground. We stopped playing, each of us looking around, feeling the tension rise. The silence was thick, and it seemed like we were the only people left in the world. Just then, one of my teammates screamed. We all turned, and there, on the far end of the field, was an old, torn soccer jersey lying on the grass. It was dirty, covered in mud and something dark that looked suspiciously like blood. None of us recognized it, and it certainly hadn't been there before. The atmosphere turned heavy, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your stomach sink. My friends were visibly shaken, but we tried to shrug it off, telling each other it was probably just an old uniform someone left behind. But then we heard it, a faint sound, like someone calling from the woods. A voice, muffled but clear enough, saying something we couldn't quite understand. It sounded like laughter, or maybe crying. One of my friends turned to leave, but the rest of us wanted to stay, convinced it was just some kids trying to mess with us. The lights flickered again, and for a split second, I saw a figure standing just beyond the edge of the field, right where the trees began. It was tall and thin, and though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was looking right at us. This time, I wasn't the only one who saw it. My teammate's face went white as he pointed, stuttering. Did you guys see that?" The figure didn't move, just stood there, almost blending into the trees, as if it were a part of the forest itself. Then the lights went out completely, plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as we tried to feel our way off the field. But in the confusion, I heard footsteps, slow and heavy, coming closer. One of my teammates found his phone and used it as a flashlight, sweeping it across the field. But as he turned, the light caught something disturbing. Standing at the edge of the field, where the figure had been, was now a line of people, at least 4 or 5 shapes, just standing there, silent and still, like they were waiting for something. We didn't need any more convincing. We bolted, stumbling over each other in our rush to get off the field. By the time we reached the parking lot, we were all gasping, looking back to make sure no one had followed us. We never practiced there at night again, and a few of my teammates wouldn't even talk about what happened. But curiosity got the better of me, and I did some digging. I found an old newspaper article about a tragedy that had happened on that field decades ago, a player who had gone missing after a Halloween night of practice. They never found him, only his torn, bloodied jersey abandoned on the field. That night still haunts me. Every Halloween, I think about those silent figures in the mist, standing just beyond the edge of the field, watching, waiting, and I can't help but wonder if they were just shadows, or if somehow they were waiting for one of us to join them.